the great Albert Breer. Albert, thank you for joining us. All right, let's just start with the Jets, because I was talking there. What are fair expectations, and do you think, from what you heard there, that I'm being too pessimistic about them?
Yeah, I mean, I think they should expect to be in the playoffs. You know, you don't go and acquire a quarterback like that without expecting to be in the playoffs. I also think a lot of people are overlooking Buffalo and ignoring what Buffalo went through last year. And, you know, you look at it, Nick, and you go right on down the list of things they went through. Obviously, the tragedy locally before the season. They had 2 snowstorms that displaced the team. Then, of course, the DeMar Hamlin thing at the end of the year. They were beat up. They lost Von Miller. Josh Allen got beat up. I mean, by the time you got to January, and I know everybody's last image of them is them looking listless against Cincinnati in the playoffs, that team was on fumes. And they've been a really good team for a while now. And they've got a bunch of really good frontline players. And so I still think Buffalo is the favorite in the division, and it's hard to have the expectation that the Jets are going to win the division, but they should expect to be in the playoffs. And, you know, where I would push back on you, I think the defense has a chance to be a top 5 group. Like, I really do. I think, you know, you look at the different levels of it, and they go 10 deep on the defensive line. You know, some of the Carolina people that practice against them told me, like, they think it's the best defensive line in football. They've got a just absolute veteran mainstay at middle linebacker and C.J. Mosley. And then on the back end, they've got a lot of experience and maybe the best corner in football in Sauce Gardner. So I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to have to be spectacular early in the year for them to be competitive. I think everything comes down to the offensive line. I think that's the swing factor. I think that could be the difference between 8 wins and 11 or 12 wins. And, you know, to me, more than anything, it comes down to the 2 tackle spots. And so at Dwayne Brown, he's going to turn 38 years old. Does he hold up at that age? He was hurt last year, had a really bad rotator cuff injury. And then Mekhi Becton, who's been one of the least reliable players on the team, can you count on him to deliver for you at right tackle? To me, I think those 2 questions are going to swing the season one way or the other.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I do think the defense will be very good. I mean, Quinnen Williams, superstar. Sauce Gardner is going to be a superstar. I wonder if the defense being a top 5 defense will be enough. And you say they should expect to be in the playoffs. I look at the AFC right now, Albert. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. And I think, you know, the other thing you mentioned, I do think, like, there's going to be an effect that Aaron has on the skill players in the roster, right?
Yep.
Like, now Breece Hall, the ACL makes it a little less predictable, but having the threat of Aaron Rodgers there is going to help the run game. And Breece Hall was spectacular last year. And then Garrett Wilson, I get what you're saying, that there are a lot of teams that have good receivers, and this is a golden age for a receiver, basically because of what 7-on-7's done to the game and because the best athletes are gravitating towards that position. That's all true. I just think Aaron Rodgers could have the sort of effect on Garrett Wilson that, say, Tom Brady had on Chris Godwin, or that Brett Favre had on Sidney Rice, or that Peyton Manning had on Demaryius Thomas and Eric Decker, where those guys were young players who looked like really young players who found another level because they were paired with a Hall of Fame quarterback. And by the way, they've got some nice complementary pieces around Garrett, too, and McCole Hardman and Alan Lazard. So I think that there's a little more there than you're giving them credit for.
So there is going to be an element of AFC musical chairs when it looks like teams who expect to be in the postseason. Let's take the AFC South, take them all out except for the Jags. I know the Titans with Vrabel will probably expect every year, but let's just say maybe they go to a young quarterback. Take the Raiders out, and everyone else is like, we need to be in the playoffs. The Patriots, their owner has made it very clear we need to be in the playoffs. They won 8 games last year with a defensive coordinator and an offensive coordinator. The entire AFC North feels like we must be in the playoffs this year. And then obviously the Broncos, Sean Payton said, it's going to be a travesty if we're not in the playoffs. It was all Nat Hackett's fault, and then obviously Chargers, Chiefs. One team that I feel has maybe gone a little under the radar is the Steelers. The Steelers last year, Albert, their best player missed 7 games. They started a rookie quarterback. They won 9 games. The rookie, now I'm not a huge Kenny Pickett fan, even though he had a great preseason. He'll be better than last year. TJ Watt, let's assume he doesn't miss 7 games. If they won 9 games like that, why are the Steelers, I look at the Steelers and say, they could be an 11-win team. Where do you land on them?
I'm with you on that. They were ascending at the end of the year too. I believe they were 1-6. I'd have to look that up. I think they were 1-6, and we were all like, okay, the Mike Tomlin streak of never having a losing year is going to come to an end.
It's dead. Yep,
and
it
sure
wasn't.
enough, they win 7 of their last 9, and it's still alive. And they won it with ascending young players, and it's interesting watching them now, and you see them in the preseason, and they've looked impressive at the age of some of the guys on offense. You mentioned Kenny Pickett's second year, George Pickens' second year. Deontay Johnson's now a veteran, but he's still, in his, I believe, mid to late 20s, right? He's right in that age range where he's in his prime. Pat Freiermuth looks like he's going to be a real player at tight end. If the left tackle they drafted 14th overall, Broderick Jones, works out, then you've got another premium position taken care of. And the defense is the defense. The defense has got really solid players. And they got waves of really solid players. Bianchis, TJ Watt, and Minka Fitzpatrick, guys like Highsmith. I think we've almost become like numb to the success of the Steelers because it's been so long since they've been bad and they haven't been elite in a while. But I certainly think you can look at that roster and say they were 7-2 to finish the year last year. There's a lot of second, third, fourth year players that are still ascending. There's a good number of players that are right in their prime, the Fitzpatricks and the Watts. This is a team where it could all come together at once for them. So I'm with you on that one. And I think, the AFC North is of all of the of the 4 divisions in the
toughest
AFC,
division
the strongest
in football.
group. Because I don't think it's impossible to see any of the 4 teams in that division winning the thing.
Well, listen, and I don't believe in what the Browns are doing or what they've done over the last couple of years, but they obviously feel like we better make the playoffs right now. Yeah, they have talent, and then obviously the Bengals are a lot of people's Super Bowl pick. The Ravens just gave Lamar the contract, got the receivers. Everybody feels like right now's our moment. It's going to be very interesting to watch. All right, let's go over to the NFC. The giant news. Trey Lance traded for a 4th-round pick. Let's talk about it from the Cowboys' perspective. I mean, he takes over for Dak Prescott in like 2 weeks, right? Okay, well, actually, why do you think they did this, and what do you think the rationale is for him?
And the rationale is it's a player they liked coming out. The price was, relatively affordable, a 4th-round pick. The reason there wasn't more of a market was because he has guaranteed money next year. It's not about this year. Most of the money's paid for this year. He's due over $5 million, fully guaranteed next year. So, most teams that looked at this and said, we liked him coming out, we'll take a flyer on him, didn't want to be responsible for the money in 2024 because that basically locks him into a roster spot. So, that's why he was available at the price he was available, including, in addition to obviously the way that he's played over his first 2 years, the little tape that he has. And I think for Dallas, it sort of becomes one of those things where Dak Prescott has had injury problems over the course of his career. It creates a layer of depth. And, Mike McCarthy really believes in his ability to develop quarterbacks. And he once helped develop Aaron Rodgers when Aaron Rodgers wasn't playing. And, the contract situation with Dak Prescott is one that's going to need to be taken care of eventually. And if things get tough, does this give them a little bit of leverage? I always think that those are in the background of moves like this, where you can say to yourself, okay, there's something to work with still here talent-wise. NFL people will tell you, watching Trey Lance, now his confidence is shot. He's lost some accuracy because of it. He doesn't look comfortable running. But the stuff that got him drafted 3rd overall, that stuff's still on tape. And so to me, this is Dallas looking at it and saying, maybe we can harvest something here. And if we can harvest something here, maybe this gives us a little bit more leverage when we're talking to Dak Prescott about a contract.
That's not surprisingly, you're spot on there. I think people don't understand that the Cowboys don't have the ability to franchise Dak after this contract. So if he were to just play out the next 2 years, he's a free and clear free agent at 31 years old and would instantly command the biggest contract in NFL history. So Dak has that leverage next offseason. It's like a year out, and he can say, this is what I want. If you don't give it to me, I can hit the open market. So maybe the Cowboys claw a tiny bit of that leverage back by acquiring Trey, see what he looks like over the course of the year. Now the Niners' perspective. No one has been able to explain this to me, Albert. Maybe you can, or maybe it's inexplicable. The San Francisco 49ers had seen enough of Trey Lance to lock Jimmy Garoppolo out of the building, make him the starting quarterback. He then plays a game in a monsoon and a quarter and breaks his leg. By virtue of a broken leg, I don't know a lot about medicine. I know this. Can't practice football on the broken leg. So not a lot of practicing going on the rest of the season for him. By February, it was being reported they were shopping him. So what changed for them that they went from he's our quarterback to he's available to, and then the latest one is not as good as Sam Darnold? When they could have just made Trey the backup, Darnold the third string, they wouldn't have had to trade anybody. What happened?
So two things happened. Number one, the championship window shortened, and then number two, Brock Purdy came along. And I think those two things are interrelated. Last year, they knew that was the last year of Jimmy Garoppolo. They spent the third overall pick on Trey Lance. And, look, I had somebody high up in that building concede to me in August of last year. Jimmy's still the better quarterback, but we believe if we can get Trey Lance reps, that by the time we get to December or January, Trey Lance is going to be the better quarterback because we think we'll be able to build an offense for him and develop him through that. And they were willing at the time to ride out the bumps. They were willing to say, okay, well, if it means we have a 2-2 stretch, that's okay in the name of developing this young quarterback because right now, he's our best option for the next 5 to 10 years. Then Trey Lance gets hurt, and now you get Jimmy Garoppolo in there. Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt. Brock Purdy gets in there. By this point, they really like what they've seen with Brock Purdy, and lo and behold, he goes undefeated on the way to the NFC title game, and he looks like he's going to give you every single thing that you'd considered trying to get when you were looking at drafting Mac Jones. Now you get into this offseason, and it's okay, what's the most fair thing to Fred Warner, to Nick Bosa, to Trent Williams, to Deebo Samuel, to Christian McCaffrey, to all of these guys that are in the prime of their career on one of the most talented rosters in football, if not the most talented roster in football? What's most fair to them? Do we potentially sacrifice another season in the name of quarterback development and build an offense for the guy? Or do we go with what we know? And they chose in this case to go with what they know, which is that Brock Purdy can run the traditional Kyle Shanahan offense. So now you've made that decision. Okay, we're going to run the more traditional Kyle Shanahan offense. What's the next level to that? Well, we need a backup who can run it. And if Trey Lance requires playing a different type of offense, then he becomes a tougher fit as a backup. Remember, the job of backup quarterback isn't the same job as starting quarterback. Nobody's building an offense for a backup. They want your backup to fit what your starter does. And that's where Trey Lance, I think, became a little bit of a wonky fit. They have him running that offense. He looks worse because of it. And now they're in this really awkward situation where the timing that the roster has in its championship window doesn't time up with the development of the young quarterback. And look, it sucks because Trey Lance needs to play. He's only started 21 games since high school. That's 21 games since 2018. He graduated high school in the spring of 2018.
It's
he
unbelievable.
needs to play. And the problem is because of COVID, because of injuries, because of the redshirt year with the Niners, he hasn't had those opportunities. He hasn't seen enough. And it's really hard to gamble that it's all going to work out when you've got a championship roster the Niners do. So look, there's a bad mess by the Niners, no question about it. I'm just not sure it's like anybody's fault that this didn't work out. It's just a bunch of circumstances that kind of came together to make it come undone. And it's not an excuse for Lynch or Shanahan, but the reason that they can wiggle their way out of this without having their job security called into question is because A, they built the best roster in football or one of the best rosters in football around the quarterback, and B, they hit on a 7th-round pick who I don't know if he's going to be a great player, but it's good enough to run the team.
Right. They now are very invested in Brock Purdy at least just being fine. If Brock Purdy off the injury and now the teams have a whole half season of tape on him, if he regresses, Sam Darnold's not saving the day.
And Nick, here's the other thing. The locker room knows. The locker room knows who their best option is, right? So if Trey's really struggling in practice, again, go down those names, right? Fred Warner, Nick Bosa. Do you think those guys care about the development of a young quarterback? No. Those guys care about winning right now. I'm not saying they don't care about the individual, Trey Lance, the individual, but they know where they're at and they see what they see in practice. They know better than anybody. And, it's the coach's responsibility to fill the most important position on the field with the guy most capable of taking that team to a championship.
Yep.
And, right now, the best option for them is Brock Purdy. And I know a lot of people have a hard time believing that, but that's what it is.
All right, 2 quick hitters before I let you go. You mentioned Nick Bosa, the Defensive Player of the Year last year and the Defensive Player of the Year runner-up. Nick Bosa and Chris Jones have something in common, not with their teams right now. Do you think either misses actual games? Do you think both get done? How do you see it landing?
I think Nick Bosa gets done this week. I think it's difficult because it's at the highest end of defensive player contracts. He's going to be the highest paid edge rusher. He might wind up being the highest paid player. Aaron Donald's numbers, obviously a little bit of an outlier, but he might get there. And, I think this is always going to be difficult because the Bosa family, because of, the dad, is very business minded and very much knows their worth. And they aren't afraid to draw a hard line and fight for their worth. So yeah. I think in the end, the Niners have to get this done. And again, it's like in part because of the responsibility to the locker room that this is a championship team and you want a guy who's probably your best player in the fold before the season starts. Chris Jones is more complicated. Chris Jones has been willing to incur $1.8 million in fines. There's a deadline coming tomorrow. If he doesn't show up by tomorrow, then if the Chiefs go and get a roster exemption for him after he reports, they can withhold more than $2 million on top of everything else from him. So the fact that Chris Jones has been willing to go this far to do this is eye-opening. And I think we should all have, I guess, respect for what he's doing, but also understand that this could mean that, like, he's willing to see this through for the long haul. And it's been really expensive for him. But, I think what's hard about it is that, like, he wants to be paid like Aaron Donald. And I think the Chiefs are willing to say, okay, like, we'll pay you on the defensive tackle market. So we'll pay you an incremental increase over what Jeff Simmons and what Quinnen Williams got. But Donald's a total outlier. There was a similar situation like this at receiver 10 years ago where Calvin Johnson was making so much more than everybody else that it made it hard for the Broncos to do a deal with Demaryius Thomas. It made it hard for the Cowboys to do a deal with Des Bryant. And that's sort of where the divide is. And you think, okay, like split the difference or find some solution. But Chris Jones's actions should tell you he's pretty serious about getting what he thinks he's worth.
All right, and I'll let you out here on this one. I listen to Cowherd all the time. I mean, they're ready to just anoint Michigan national champions. I mean, they're undefeated. They're going to do all this stuff. I personally, I think that it's really a question of who Caleb Williams is going to beat in the national championship game. You want to make the case for Ohio State before you go?
I mean, all you got to do is watch the draft on those Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays in April, right? Okay. I mean, I would say there's very good high-end talent at Ohio State right now, from Marvin Harrison to JT Tuimalau to Denzel Burke to Emeka Egbuka. Yeah. Like, there are a lot of high draft picks on the roster. Now it's going to be on the coaches to bring the whole thing together and find a quarterback, and that's the big question. But I would say that what happened against Georgia wasn't by accident, and it's important to remember that game came down to the wire, despite the fact that Marvin Harrison wasn't playing, despite the fact that Travion Henderson wasn't playing. That was an injury-riddled team last year. So I don't think anybody should be shocked if Ohio State's able to run with absolutely anybody in the country.
No, and I'm excited to watch Caleb Williams throw to Marvin Harrison on the Arizona Cardinals next year when they have their pick and the Texans pick, and they absolutely reload. Albert, thank you so much. Great job as always, man. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.